Welcome on another episode of Democracy Innovator Podcast, and our guests of today are Marco Cappato and Francesco Vecchi. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And you're working on Eumans, right? What is the movement?
Eumans is a pan-European movement of popular initiative. What does it mean? A movement that is directly European, so open to the membership of people all around Europe without the need of passing through national organization. So it's a directly citizens-led movement directly at the European dimension, and is political but non-electoral. So popular initiative because we do politics in political initiatives, but through the tools of civic participation at European level, for example, the European Citizens Initiatives, but also national, regional, and local level, because we think that the two main limits and problems of democracy nowadays are, first of all, democracy is mainly national, but the problem of our era are mainly transnational, supra and infranational also. And we also think that electoral democracy is too concentrated, focused on short-term consensus in front of problems that need long-term solutions. So there is the need to complement electoral democracy, national electoral democracy, through a robust dose, a strong dose of pan-European citizen-led democracy, direct participation.
Yeah, let me add a couple of things. I do think that what Marco said is really true. The point is that Eumans was also born to fill in the gaps of a few dissatisfactions. We believe of citizens in general, but especially we started from the Italian use case, and the dissatisfaction were not only the scope of the participation, meaning national versus international, but also the satisfaction that a lot of widespread, a lot of campaigns, a lot of ideas that would be widespread among the public. So I don't know, for example, euthanasia rights or abortion rights and other things didn't really find any match into the political debate, because any party is a bit worried of losing some specific constituencies that would be against that. And since party politics is about gaining consensus and gaining, let's say, quantitative consensus, no one can really afford losing that kind of political support. Therefore, we do believe that there are some topics that should be discussed outside, or at least whose discussion should be complemented outside of usual representative democracy, and this is the case again for transversal political initiatives.
And now you're both working on a campaign called Civic AI, right?
Yes, we do.
What is Civic AI? This is a very tough question. Maybe I can step in here. The problem in defining civic artificial intelligence is that we are, first of all, speaking of a moving target under so many different layers. The technology itself is a moving target. The technology itself is extremely complex, and it is multi-layered. It starts from the infrastructure, then it gets to the layer of how data are collected, stored, gathered, and used, and then there is the level of the algorithm. And then there is the level of the software, and then there is the level of the interface with users and the effects that artificial intelligence might have on specific users and citizens, therefore. It's not only the technology which is a moving target, but the regulation of the technology is a moving target on its own. I mean, we have the example of the European Union and other places in the world are starting to regulating AI, of course, with completely different approaches compared to the European Union's one. But then another problem is also that I can say the dissemination of this technology into the contemporary public sphere, and especially the digital sphere, is constantly changing because we are also getting used to the different applications. So is Civic AI a fight against the disinformation, generative AI-led disinformation? Is Civic AI, I can say, the campaign for ensuring that each specific layer that I mentioned earlier complies with European values and democratic values? Is it a campaign for increasing and enhancing civic participation online, also through the support of Civic AI chatbots or virtual assistants or platforms? I mean, the point is that Civic AI is a bit of everything. Maybe I'll leave the floor to Marco to explain what was the original idea of Civic AI, and then I can get back the word to explain, you know, what we did in the last few months and what we are trying to do, what we plan to do in the upcoming weeks and months.
Yes, well, I will start from the consideration that almost, I think, 99.999% of investment of a huge, immense amount of money poured into artificial intelligence in the current times is driven by either commercial purpose, profit, company, either control, warfare, security, but there is virtually no investment, or really marginal, on the use of AI to empower the citizen. That's exactly the meaning of Civic AI, artificial intelligence as a public service. There is no major invention and a technological advancement that didn't have both the private commercial use, but at the same time the issue of how this invention could be provided as a public service. Let's think about, I don't know, power, electricity, gas, mobility, cars, and so on. The revolution that we are experiencing, that is already triggered, is there is a lot of debate on how we should regulate and limit the risk of abuse, manipulation, and so on. But there is no real discussion, and most important, no real big plan and investment on how this revolution could also, not as an alternative, but also be used to benefit the citizens and empower the citizens on those issues without direct commercial interest. The first example, the main one probably, is democracy. We know that democracy is in a big crisis. There is lower and lower participation rate, attendance rate to elections, and people are losing faith and trust on how democracy could really help in giving solutions to the problem of daily life. So the idea of empowering through artificial intelligence the possibility of citizens of dialoguing and acting with institutions and among themselves to find solution for their life, for the quality of their life, for the quality of the environment. This is something that we cannot hope that will be solved by big tech in Silicon Valley or in China. This is a political problem that needs to be replied with a political solution at the public institutional level. And the European Union is the only dimension that could, in a way, federate, aggregate what is already existing as civic use of artificial intelligence, to make them interoperable, to unite them, and to create a digital ecosystem to empower the citizens in the daily life. So this is the idea of having also this path for the future of artificial intelligence, not only the current paths that billions of billions of billions of billions are invested and attracted to.
Yes, if I may add something on this, in fact, thank you, Marco, for mentioning, the need for creating I can say, an ecosystem, a digital ecosystem. This is exactly one of the most important things to clarify when speaking about Civic AI. What we do have in mind is trying to outline a European digital public sphere. Since technologies in general, but especially AI, are influencing every single aspect of how we do interact publicly. So they're influencing the way information is shared, they're influencing the way we interact with public organizations or public institutions. They are influencing also our daily lives. We must ensure that everything in our, in this mixed reality, in this hybrid reality that we are living through, which is mixing, I can say, physical assets and digital assets, we must ensure that these also exist at the same. This is permeated by democratic values. At the same time, while this was the original idea of the petition, maybe not all of you know that any citizen in the European Union can can submit a petition to the European Parliament, and this was exactly what Marco did, supported by some experts, especially from Italy, but not only from Italy. What happened to the petition was that the petition was first examined by the committee of the European Parliament dedicated to petitions, and then we were asked to present it in April 2025 in front of the committee. In that case, Marco asked me to go simply because I was in Brussels, and after in that case, we gathered the support of all representatives from all groups of the Parliament for our initiative. In that, I must admit that in that case, we did not only present again the petition was already existing, and you can still find on our website, but what we tried to outline is exactly this, the pan-European digital public sphere. And this public sphere was composed of four main strands. The first one is a civic assistant. So we, in our effort to explain what we mean with Civic AI, the first visualization that we got was a sort of chatbot or virtual assistant that would help any citizen navigate not only the complex framework of the European Union, but especially all the participatory opportunities, the deliberative opportunities they can jump in, and in general gather insights and feedback on how they can actively participate in the European democracy. There are plenty of things that citizens can do. For example, provide feedback to open consultations of the European Commission. This is going to be important also for later on. They can, on the Have Your Say portal, they can, for instance, participate in the citizens engagement forum. Sometimes there are participatory and deliberative initiatives, such as was the conference on the future of Europe. But in most cases, people simply don't know. And what we have to accept when we do politics is that citizens are getting used not even at having services delivered as a softwares or as platforms, but they are getting used of having services delivered through virtual assistants and chatbots. This is the main trend that we see. So we would like that public services, not only as the services given by public authorities, but also democracy, which is a public service in its own. I mean, it is so trivial admitting this, but still, sometimes we do forget that democracy should be a public service in its own. Well, we must ensure that they are provided in the most citizen-friendly way. Why am I mentioning all of this? Because this was just, in fact, the first trend. There are other strand. For example, we mentioned the participatory dashboard. So let's say a sort of platform that once you sign in with your ideally European digital identity, according to the data you provide to the specific platform, you see all the participatory initiatives that you can join, depending, of course, on your residency rights, your nationality rights, your citizenship rights, and so on and so forth. And third, there was the deliberation engine, so creating a sort of tool that would help public deliberation through all the technology, including AI, but through other technologies that help create collective intelligence among topics. And I mean, these technologies already existed again in the platform for the Conference on the Future of Europe. So we're not saying to deploy something completely new, but just to adapt what's existing to a slightly different scope. And finally, but this is probably one of the most important layers, there is what we call the democracy data commons. So the concept of data commons, and I know that Marco probably would like to add something on that as well, but the concept of data commons is creating these sort of data spaces that are public, not necessarily publicly managed, but definitely publicly owned and publicly controlled and governed. Not necessarily, again, by a government, like, let's say, the European Commission, but it might be by third authorities or independent authorities like the European Data Protection Supervisor. But this data space would collect all the data regarding the democratic participation online and civic participation online. Why is it paramount? Because currently there are plenty of participatory tools, digital democracy tools, but sometimes they are either the data is either stored by specific private-oriented actors, or they are stored even outside of the EU. There are some platforms that are based in the UK, and this, of course, would create some issues for any, pan-European digital democracy tool. Because I mean, if your data is not even under European law, then of course, this raises issues. I could go on with the next steps, but probably I would like Marco to spend a couple of words on data commons, because he recently had an idea also on this.
I would like to know Alessandro's reaction, because we gave you a lot of information. So, what idea have you made out of all of this, of what civic artificial intelligence could be? Sorry if I ask questions instead of replying.
I like the question, and I'm thinking about all the interesting things that you mentioned earlier. I'm thinking about how information is power. I mean, if citizen knows what they can do, then they have also the power to do it. But as Francesca said, like, often the citizen doesn't know what he can actually do. And I was wondering, like, this dissatisfaction that citizen has. So we have seen also how people maybe, they still vote. There are elections, but we cannot say that representative democracy is at the highest. Is not the highest moment for representative democracy. And I totally agree about the possibilities that we have now using technology to make politics more accessible for citizens. Because, as you said, like, Francesco, with a chatbot, maybe it's easier to tell to a citizen what he can do or what are the possibilities. And I'm thinking also about the digital ecosystem. That is also something very important, because probably I can imagine that several platforms are needed, several expertises, and yeah, I totally also agree about how it is necessary to break the circle of technology used for control or for commercial reasons. And actually, it was yesterday. I was at the table with some PhD students that are studying these kind of things, and we were also thinking about what is the Civic AI, because I asked them the question, and it is actually not an easy thing to. It's not actually easy. But yeah, I think
maybe do some examples that could be useful, maybe also for those who probably could think, okay, but do we really want the state or Europe or the European Union be an actor in the artificial intelligence race? Is this realistic, or is really something that is suitable, even more than realistic? Well, um, let's think about, for example, platforms for civic participation. Uh, Nowadays, if you want to take an initiative, maybe in your own neighborhood, in your own city council, because you need to ask, I don't know, the respect of a park, of a green area, and so on. What you do? What are the tools? Usually you have this alternative. On one side, you have social media. You can open pages on Facebook, launch debates on TikTok and Instagram and so on. But you know that the algorithm will, in a way, will push would push the content, would push the content that are polarized and aggressive, or with a very strong idea and proposal. But civic participation should follow another logic, because you don't need to sell publicity, advertisement, products. So, unfortunately, civic participation, the tools, the non-commercial tools for civic participation are boring or non-existent or technologically, I mean, not even digital sometimes. You don't even have a possibility of digital interaction. So let's think about how important would be to have a platform for digital participation empowered with artificial intelligence, user-friendly, and at the same time with an algorithm conceived in a way that dialogue is promoted, to speak, but also to listen, to have a real interaction among citizens. Okay, and many local civic digital things exist around Europe, but they are not interconnected. They are not. You don't have a single sign-on to to have access to all the digital tools of interaction with the state and with other citizens around Europe. So this could be one of the concrete outcome of an ecosystem of European civic AI, to have interoperability of platform of democratic participation. And this is not something that a giant in Silicon Valley or in China could do, even because democracy is a two delicate things. You need to have, for example, when we are talking about signing with a formal legal value a petition or a proposal of referendum or a ballot, the state is the only authority that can authentify and certify that signature as a real one. So to ensure the legality of the process. So this is why we think that even if the technological race toward artificial intelligence is not something that the state could play or should play a competition role, from the point of view of the user, of the citizens, the empowerment with artificial intelligence-based system could be crucial in having their rights, democratic rights, but even social rights on civic participation for public goods, for example, as a user of public goods. This dimension needs to be empowered through a political choice of investment by public authorities.
Yes, again, let me take a step back to move a step forward. So, whenever we speak about Civic AI, sometimes people get the impression that we do want the European Union or whatever a public actor in the regard to develop a platform or develop a chatbot and put it in the hands of the citizens. I mean, developing this kind of tool is extremely expensive, and not always the public institutions do have the talent pool needed to develop something that would effectively work. And in that case again, as Marco was saying, I mean, they would put themselves into competition with the private actors that have more money, more talent, and more expertise in the field. So why did I mention to take a step back? Let's have a look at the European Digital Wallet and the eIDAS framework. What did the European Union do in that regard? They first of all developed a framework that would outline some rules, some guidelines on how to deploy softwares and tools for trust service providers for digital identity. That happened, I mean, I don't remember if 5-10 years ago, the first version, and then recently the second version was published. According to the frameworks that were deployed by the European Union, basically the assumption was, okay, if you comply with these frameworks and you deploy a specific tool, then this tool will receive that kind of public certification that Marco was mentioning earlier. They created a sort of market incentive. In that case, for example, in Italy, we had the deployment of two main tools. Well, on the one hand, you have speed. On the other hand, you have the electronic digital identity. Two completely different structures. They are slightly different, but let's say that both comply with the eIDAS framework. What happened then? That with those tools, for example, Monaco and especially Associazione Luca Coscioni and other actors in Italy, they fought for getting the possibility of signing digitally referendums, which means, that these platforms that had just received market incentive, let's say, because they were complying with rules, with laws, so they could be used for anything public and official. Then now they are actually used for signing official referenda, or at least the proposal, sorry, Mark, if I make a mistake. Why am I mentioning all of this? Well, because, for example, something that the European Union can do is this. First of all, write a sort of framework for what is needed for electronic participation tool to be compliant with EU law and to be officially recognized, for any interaction happening on this tool to be officially recognized by the European Union. Second, deploy, as I was mentioning, a sort of data space for democracy in order to, and binding every actor, private or public may they be, to store the data and to manage the data through that data space, which is publicly owned. Of course, people, it is open, but people cannot get access to personalized data, but they can only access to anonymized data for doing research and whatever. And then deploy, always the European Union, a sort of a single sign-on platform. May it be a chatbot, may it be, I don't know, a dashboard or whatever, where you can sign up with your European digital identity. And once you're signed up, I mean, depending on your data, okay, you get, what is it that you see? What you see is not only the participatory opportunities that you're in, but every municipality, every level of governance can upload a participatory process online, choosing themselves the specific tool they use, but with the data that goes again to the Democracy Data Commons. Why is this solution more feasible than deploying a chatbot by the public administration? Because, for example, this would not only, how can I say, this would only require interoperability of all the systems, especially with the European Digital Wallet. This would not necessarily require a centralized data storage. This would not require a centralized tool, but it would, in fact, allow for a proliferation of decentralized tools. So on decentralization, in fact, I can move a step forward. You asked us, it's not so easy to understand what Civic AI is. Okay, everything that I just mentioned is not even AI. I mean, there can be a virtual assistant or a chatbot that would help you navigate across all these platforms or whatever. There could be some machine learning systems, again, you know, to regulate the debate online according to specific rules. There can be some, I don't know, yeah, some complex data analysis for creating collective intelligence on specific participatory processes. Again, these are also AI technologies, but can be achieved even with other technologies. But when we speak about Civic AI, we could also mention, again, for example, the infrastructure layer. So currently, as Marco was saying, the AI market is extremely centralized by few monopolies that own not only, I can say, that the software, and they do not really allow anyone to understand what are the weights, what is the whole process they use, because of course they base their business model on that. But the problem is that oftentimes what is centralized is infrastructures. I've recently been to the Mozilla Festival in Barcelona, and there I attended to a session that was speaking of how a federated AI system is possible. So different organizations, different places can have their, I don't know, data servers or whatever is needed to deploy an artificial intelligence system. And then what they can do is to federate this system so that the data is still owned by any specific organization, but their AI models are trained on all the data. So they can run all over the data, but yet, you know, this data doesn't get centralized. So again, why am I mentioning this when it comes to Civic AI? Because one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves is, do we want AI to be held by a monopoly, may it be public or private, or do we want it also to reflect the values of democracy, of even competition in a way that are embodied in the European Union at the infrastructure level as well? And there again, I mean, we can start conversations on, for example, even on blockchain technologies, on distributed ledger technologies, and how to use them. But just to, this is just to let understand that beyond visualizing what Civic AI is, what is important to understand is that artificial intelligence is a general technology as much as was the internet. And as such, it affects many different layers. And translating our democratic values and our civic values into AI to enhance a civic participation and not reduce it, you know, through profanation and through I can say the increase of misinformation and whatsoever, well, we really need to reflect at all the different layers of this technology. And in this regard, probably Europe, if it would adopt a different approach compared to the other two giants, especially US and China, well, probably it would really find a way of being competitive in the market through a more democratic approach to technology, which is not only reflected in, I don't know, huge words like trustworthy, citizen-centric, and blah, blah regulation that is only risk-based, as it is now.
It's very interesting, the data space thing. It's also something that with some people that are developing civic tech tools, we were thinking about, because let's say there is a citizen assembly, I don't know, in Italy, and then another one in Germany, then if the topic is similar, then it will be worth it maybe to have a connection between the two citizen assembly to understand better what citizens want, and yeah, it's very interesting, these things.
And yeah, maybe we could raise the question: which are the only data that a dictatorship will never have access to? Because we know that, for example, in China, there is no privacy issue. So every data are collected in a massive way without privacy restrictions. So we tend to think, which is true, they have a huge competitive advantage in terms of the amount of data they can use to train artificial intelligence for commercial and control purpose. But which is the data set they will never have? The democratic participation data set. If we, as Europe, if we would make systematic the promotion of civic participation, citizens' assembly, local democracy, local referendum, local ballot proposal, regional, national, European, and those data anonymized, of course. How huge value we could extract from it in terms of what are the needs of the people, the priorities for their own lives. And if you combine this to the data that are owned by public authorities, because we also tend to think, okay, now Silicon Valley, they have all our personal data because we are on the iPhone and Facebook and TikTok and so on. But we don't have to forget that for the time being, maybe in 10 years it will be different, but the biggest amount of data, it's still in the hands of the state. Even if the state is not using as Silicon Valley is using, but the health data, for example, are detained by the state. The justice related, the justice system data, but all the public activity that are producing data that sometimes are not even collected by the state. So this is why at the European level we could create a dimension for the use, for the collection and use of public data for public purpose, and we could also add the possibility of voluntarily donate our personal data, anonymized, of course, to in a way to nourish, to make grow this public data set. So I think that even at the level of data, that we tend to think that is a lost battle because the giant of artificial intelligence are treating amount of data that the public entity will never be able to use. I think this is not true. But it is not true if we choose to invest on the creation, on the treatment, on the collection and the treatment of those data. Of course, if we stay steady and looking at what is happening without doing anything, I think that unfortunately the state and the public dimension of institution and the public interest will become less and less relevant, because if the world is changing without and outside public institution and public interest and the democracy, well, democracy will lose value. It will not be any longer an activity strongly considered by the people as an activity able to improve their lives. And this would be the final defeat for democracy, not the crisis, but really the defeat. So this is why to invest on this macro level that we call Civic AI, and as Francesco explained, can mean many different things, is really a political, strategical choice that has to be made, but it's a urgent choice, because in 10 years, the amount of money that would be collected for commercial purposes, if we don't do the same thing for public use purposes, would be so bigger that it would be a lost battle to try to include public interest logic and citizens-led logic in the race, in the artificial intelligence race.
Well, yes, in this, let me add something. I mean, let me go back to what I said earlier. I think that in the last few decades, we forgot that democracy is a public service. I mean, let's think about that. Most of the public debate happens on digital platforms that are profit-led and private-owned, not even inside of the European Union. I mean, I think that both Mark and I have nothing against businesses. Okay, that's not the problem. But the problem is that if the public debate happens mostly on private-owned platforms, it means that those who own the platform can dictate the rules. And this is the reason for which, I mean, back in the days, I mean, let's not speak about Trump and now, what's happening, for example, on platforms like Meta, Facebook, and blah, blah, for what concerns, for example, feminist content and whatsoever. But before Trump stepped in, these platforms that are mostly US based would follow the policies of the government back in the days, which was the democratic government. And therefore, I mean, you saw that Donald Trump was just banned from Twitter because after January the 6th. And I mean, there were other contents that were, censored or limited and whatsoever. I mean, even though we can agree that those content must be censored, the point is that who is in charge of censoring them? And this must be the public if we decide to censor them, or this debate must be held on public platforms. Until it is held on a private platform, this is going to be a problem. But most of us simply accepted that since there are these huge marketplaces, let's say, these huge single sign-on places, so, I mean, one size fits all and everyone has to go there. If I were the representative of a newspaper, I would seriously think, but do we really want to communicate what we do on this social network? And this is just one case, okay? Let's take another one. There are some, especially local public institutions that are already deploying chatbots and virtual assistants to interact with the public. The problem is that oftentimes they are extremely limited. Like they only answer to questions about what are the services that they provide. And if you ask a question, for instance, who is going to be the candidate at the next municipal elections in my town? They do not provide that answer. They don't have it, even though they are the public authority. And at some point, they will have to register, these elections, how who will win or not. But the other problem is also that. I think it's news from the last month. Microsoft, so meaning Copilot, bought the license for a lot of data from Harvard Medical School. Most likely this happened because they want to make Copilot the most trustworthy chatbot for what concerns data on even basic health, which means that you would ask Copilot if you can take paracetamol while you're drinking or vice versa. Okay. But these kind of basic medical questions should be deployed by the public. I mean, this should be a question of, public health services. Why is it a private company that will get all this interaction data and understand what are the needs of the citizens and then can use that data to provide even further services? Again, neither Mark or I are against businesses. Personally, I have no issues with them. But the point is that there is a series of services that must be deployed by the public, or otherwise we are creating a very tricky situation.
I totally agree. I'm thinking that maybe this difference is also something that, US and Europe have different approach to health. One that is more public and one more private. And I have a lot of other questions, but I don't know if you have more time. Or if
well,
Marco...
I can stay until the 1, as I said. So I don't know, Marco, if he has to step out already.
I have still a few minutes because I need to go. So if there is a last question for me, then I will leave you for the final.
Yeah, it is. So all this ecosystem, all the data space and so on could maybe lead to some to a society where all citizens are also active, maybe where they can actually participate. Do you think that this is possible?
Yes, I mean, in society already, cooperation plays a big role. We are not only, there are plenty of non-profit dimensions of our private life. even from family relationship and friends, and also the relationship with the community. And we know how this is important. As Francesco said, is not against the market, or is not alternative, but we do a lot of things because we like to do to for cooperation, and in a way to be useful to the others, or also for our own interests through democratic participation, because we have to defend our rights and even our economic interests. So the political dimension and the social dimensions are a very important part of our society. The risk is that if artificial intelligence empowers only the part of our life which is dominated by the logic, or is included in the logic of market interaction, the social dimension of our life risk to lose weight, to lose importance in our own life. And at the contrary, I think that if we would be able, in an easy way, in a consumer-friendly way, to reinforce, to raise the part of our life dedicated to society and the others, we would do that. So I think that, well, it would be naive to think that everybody want to participate, that everybody want to make a political initiative. Is not what I think. But at the same time, if it would make if it would be made much more easier to do so, that we would see a huge increase in quantity and quality of civic participation and socially driven action. See, this I really do believe, because human being is a social animal.
Sorry if I interrupt you, but I mean, just to ask you, I mean, what happened with the Italian platform for presenting the referenda online?
Well,
there was a blossoming of proposals, wasn't
this
it?
Was a huge change, because nowadays you have a lot of ballot and even referendum proposals that are made easier, at least in the collection of signature phases. But of course, democracy is not about just about voting, but not even just about signing. Democracy is something more, is being informed, discussing, is a dialogue. There are a lot of processes that should be facilitated before the moment of voting or signing something. So this is the ecosystem that we need to build thanks to digital innovation. And we are not doing so, if not in marginal ways, in marginal experiment at the local level or sometimes at national level. But there is no the political really decision of following this path, of choosing this priority for the evolution of the democratic state. This would be important to provoke with this action. This is what we are asking to public authorities to do.
Thank you a lot, both.
Thank you. I listen to you, but I will not speak anymore because I'm on the move. Thank you. Ciao.
Thank you again. Ciao, Marco. And
yeah, I don't know if you have another question, because
maybe another question could be like if you have a message for the people that are actively searching for new solution for related to citizen participation. Maybe they are developing software, maybe they are trying to do something like Civic AI, but I don't know, in another continent, somewhere else. Like, yeah, if you have a message for them.
Yes, I mean, this is a message not only for them, but for ourselves as well. I mean, there are plenty of platforms for civic engagement and democratic participation online. There are plenty of solutions, believe me, dozens. But I think that most of them have already been interviewed in this podcast, in my point of view. Sometimes when we deploy these tools, we tend to think more of the offer and supply, let's say, and less on the demand. This is something that Marco and I would like to investigate, something that Eumans keeps, reflecting on. I mean, is there really demand for more democracy? Is there really demand for more participation? And under what terms? In what shape? What I was mentioning earlier, about that everyone is getting used to interacting with chatbots and virtual assistants, and the first way of interacting digitally. That was not the case 5 years ago. That was not the case 15 years ago. I do think that we should not only think of the tool and make the tool perfect, but thinking of something that is really used and effective for citizens and answers to their demands. Otherwise, we are creating a cathedral in the desert.
I totally agree about listening to their demands, because sometimes this is a question that I asked myself a lot of times, why people are not participating. And then I thought maybe they are participating already. It's just that I don't see it. And so I really agree that we should listen and be.
No, they are participating. I mean, Marco said it, but he didn't use these words. But when we say pan-European, we mean transnational and translocal. Something that we're getting while interacting with, especially with people that are not Italians, even though the Italian base is our strongest constituency, is that they do engage a lot, but at a local level. While Italians are mostly used to engaging at the national level or levels that are not necessarily local. Why is it relevant? Because I mean, if you deploy a tool, you have to understand that every different, let's say at least people at the, if we are thinking about the European Union, let's take the member state and let's define the people, the citizens of the member states. Each people interacts with democracy in completely different ways. And this is the result of centuries of interactions at the local, national, regional level, and it highly depends on the history of a specific country or member state. There is something to be taken into account. And the other point is, why have there been movements such as Me Too, Fridays for Future, and then there were Black Lives Matter, and so on and so forth? Or even now, currently, there is My Voice, My Choice, that is a European Citizens Initiative that collected way more than 1 million signatures, and now it's interacting with the European Parliament, the European Commission to push forward abortion rights in Europe. Why did these things work? Because there was a strong demand behind. There were decades of debate or public opinion built in this regard. I mean, this is why, even participatory and grassroots initiatives thrive, regardless of the platform they use. But unless there is that demand, people are less involved in participating. And what is interesting in my point of view is that, I don't know if it is just because of digital tools whatsoever, but clearly people are less engaged with traditional politics that requires a sort of tribal, to accept, a series of values, a series of proposals. You were part of a tribe and you couldn't get out of the community. But people can engage on single issues. Even with completely different perspectives, they can agree on a specific topic. And this is the case, for example, on euthanasia rights. There you have people from all over the spectrum, from the far left to the far right, depending on what they do believe is their need. They can, just forget that they come from a traditional, from a political tradition, and then support an initiative. So I do think that, when it comes to thinking about the needs of the demand of the service, we don't have just to translate existing processes into the digital world. We do have to completely rethink the processes according to, as Habermas would say, this new structural change of the public sphere.
So let's change how this is actually working. I mean, let's think about new ways to make participation easier, so that it can happen, everything that you and Marco described in the
Yes, if you want to contribute to how we think about how democratic participation should happen digitally, I mean, there is a page on our website where you can join the campaign. Joining the campaign means that you can get access to our working groups and you can co-create with us the proposal. I mean, now we spoke about a lot, we gave you a lot of information, a lot of ideas, and most of them are not Marco's nor mine's. They are just, the ideas of the community that got integrated in all our activities. We try to co-create this campaign with everyone, and we try to experiment. So currently, I mean, we will soon move to Discord, so we will have a Discord community for the campaign. We also already have a Decidim page for some specific activities. When I started coordinating the campaign, I tried to co-create each feedback to the European Commission's public consultations together, experimenting with Mentimeter or with other methods for gathering collective intelligence. I mean, we are trying our way out because we do see that what exists is not working, and probably we need to experiment. And this is probably what I like the most of this campaign. We are literally building a political file from scratch, and it's extremely, I can say, it's extremely exciting.
Absolutely. And thank you again, Francesco.
Thank you, Alessandro, for hosting us.